We say, this is Scott Richards, and you're watching the Break It Down show. Bam.
Sure. Hi, this is Scott Richards, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
And we live in a crazy world. And the other day, we're talking about the escalation of the conflict with, um, you know how these things are. News is breaking as we're doing this quite often. The world you work in is very close to the ground, and often direct. I mean, it's amazing the inside knowledge that you have, and how often you're helping to influence the negotiations or directing the negotiations for things that are happening on the ground. So, folks, you don't know, you are very lucky to be able to have one Scott's time and your expertise. Thanks for coming on the show. We were talking before a pretty dark episode about what you saw coming down the pipe and where we go from here. And now there's been an escalation. Obviously, Israel has said, hey, negotiations are over for right now. We are going to build a pathway into your nation, and we're going to strategically attack these different sites. We have intel to back all this stuff up. Here we come, Kabul.
Yeah. So, I mean, it happened quite quickly. But it was always kind of feeling that it was inching nearer and nearer and in the realm of possibility, and that at some level that Netanyahu would make these preemptive strikes with the objective to bring the US in, which all but appears to be the case now, given the massive amount of naval asset, air asset, refueling that's coming into the Gulf at the moment, onto the Middle East. So we kind of had a sense that it had become imminent. Within sort of 24 hours, this was going to occur in terms of the initial strikes. One of the things that I work with that I think a lot of people don't understand is I work with a concept that I call scenario models. And a scenario model basically looks at a potential event and then the events that can cascade from there and the decision trees that are available as you go along, what I would call an escalation trajectory. And, when these things start, everyone will kind of look at that scenario and go, no, that's impossible. That'll never happen. That's not realistic. And we go farther and farther and farther down the escalation trajectory, because what happens is as the violence expands and things are hit or things happen, is the decisions that, say, the Iranians have, or to an extent the Israelis have, become thinner, where you can go from A to B to C, and whether you're continuing along escalation, attrition, or de-escalation. And those are kind of the three elements you go. And the Iranian option tree at the moment is getting thinner. And so the next step in that escalation that I would see would be the Strait of Hormuz. And there's some things that I warned about, saying that in their option trees would be striking Gulf facilities, oil facilities, and creating chaos, basically, as a defensive move. And the IRGC has said that if the US attacks them, they will do these things. It's whether they do or they don't, we don't know.
Right.
But that this scenario, 5-6 days into this, and it's moved so quickly. But you will know this from Iraq and Afghanistan, that it's very common that we have these shock and awe big events at the start, and then it just grinds down.
Yeah.
And the Israelis have been very effective at decapitation strikes. Organizations like the IRGC, and because we have had personality targeting as part of global war on terror for a long time, that they've designed to have resilience in their organization to lose leadership at certain points. The core media is a bit of a different animal, but yeah, it's I know I take such a simplistic view of these things. I mean, yeah.
But it is often a simplistic view, and these decision trees, right? Like, we all use some kind of form of them and this is the intel side, right? So Israel, Iran, the US are in this program, and they're all trying to influence a certain branch on the tree. Can we get over here? Can we get, well, we need time, or, we're going to need more than that. So they're trying to build these outcomes so that we can deconflict, right? And de-escalate. Meanwhile, you know that Iran is going, if we attack Israel, the Iron Dome is going to negate that. How else can we cause, influence, on this thing? And how else can we? So they're looking at alternate things while they're, genuinely focused on the main branch of it. Meanwhile, Israel, and this is just me telling me kind of describing for everybody else. Meanwhile, Israel is doing intel operations. This is my world, right? And these things didn't happen 2 weeks ago. These things have been ongoing forever, right? And they're ingenious. And the Israelis have a particular way and a particular allowance to go out and do these very long, drawn out things to where they get a purchase order from the enemy to buy the thing that will be their demise. I mean, it's really quite remarkable. And so I guess what I'm saying is just adding some three-dimensional context to that. We're aware that those things are out there, and we know that the Israelis are particularly gifted in this area, but it's not part of the tree that we can play with, because we don't know until they and Iran are like, hey, we have all the intel we need to do these strikes. It's very clear, and they'll look, if they say that from their point of view, it's 100% true. Like they're going to be like, this is why we did this thing, right? So the tree is always being manipulated by these hedges. Iran's trying to find ways to hedge. America's trying to find, we're all doing things to our advantage to try to get the outcome that we want. And if you have to yank the tree sideways and go, we just blew up all of your nuclear smart people, it changes everything. A whole new tree comes out of it. Is that, or is that too dramatic?
I think that they're much more. I think that the trees are much more fixed. Netanyahu's wanted to drag America into a war with Iran for 20 years. He's achieved that.
Sure.
So that goal has been there for a very long time. And Trump was kind of back and forth whether he would, he wouldn't, but the commitment seems fairly clear and present at this point. The decision tree is, you can see the Americans have been, their decision tree has been pulled towards Netanyahu's decision tree. And in part by virtue of what, there is there, that their dramatic capabilities and success at high-level targeting, taking out, 14 nuclear scientists with car bombs, striking the nuclear sites, disabling the Iranian air defenses in the first night, decapitation strikes on the IRGC, decapitation strikes on the Iranian military, fast-moving, and as you said, the incubation time and the collection time and the long-range planning that it takes to do this is years and years of development and source creation and penetration and access and building drone factories inside Iran. I mean, it is going to be studied for eternity on warfare. Israel is, we talk about a concept called full spectrum warfare, which is where we see everything from cyber economy, intelligence operations, manipulations, supply chain, everything turned into a weapon. And Israel is really one of the few countries that are capable of doing that. And it's the sophistication in which they've done it is impressive. And the ability to exploit these opportunities is impressive. But what we don't have, I'll come back to that. So the Iranian decision tree is a bit different. The Iranians have been fighting this like they fought last year, which is you blow up our oil, we'll blow up yours. Tit for tat exchange. That's not the war the Israelis are fighting. And so the Iranians are just making mistake after mistake, which is good for the Western interests and good for defeating the regime, because of how they're doing this. But their point becomes, so they've built this theocratic state since 1979. They've built proxy forces, which in many ways Hezbollah's pulled away from them. The Houthis are confused. And maybe they'll come back up tonight because they didn't really join in the ballistic strikes. But they still have a fairly significant engine internationally. There's still IRGC's approach is guerrilla warfare. So if they take this view that this is existential, we are going to be destroyed unless we go for maximum chaos, which is their logical response. And that is things like Hormuz, that is destabilization, that is using terror proxies, that is attacks and strikes. If they're put in that corner where their only choices are X, Y, Z, and even if it's not survival, it's just outrage, attack, or chaos as retaliation. And we may see that. We don't know. But the bigger thing that comes is, okay, so there's a plan to destroy the nuclear facilities. There's a plan to destroy the air defense systems. What's the plan after the regime collapses? What's that plan?
Hard. It's hard to pull off. I mean, it just when you say that, the first thing that comes to mind, and this is from years and years and years of time in the field, is the word nation building versus state building, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you decapitate something, that state still has to function. Right now, out in front of my house, there are a bevy of trucks and machines, and they are grinding up our street and going to lay down new asphalt. And it's amazing to see that concert going on. If that goes away in any kind of form, electricity is huge, right? If the government cannot provide electricity, chaos will happen. If government cannot provide, this is all Weber. That's not me making this up. You go read Weber and he talks about it, right? And so when we look at these things, decapitating something, making Russia wobbly so that it's less strong, is not necessarily a good thing, because some things will come and they will take that power. We see that going on in Syria now. So when you say that, this is a big deal. But let's go back a little bit. You talked about Netanyahu wanting to get the U.S. in a war. I guess the big question here is why? Why would he have this goal from really the mid-90s on until now? And has he actually achieved it? Or will President Trump say, here's where I'm going to go, and then I'm going to back out because we're going to get a deal going?
I don't think America's in a position to make deals anymore. So we saw this in ceasefire negotiations, that things would begin to move with Hamas even July last year. And then they killed Ismail Haniyeh, chief negotiator for Hamas. And so they would just kill the negotiators. They killed the negotiators for the nuclear deals in Iran. As Trump made a joke about it on television,
right?
They might be attending, and they said, "Oh, is it because they're dead?"
Yeah,
which is quite a morbid way to put it. But so Trump puts this thing out like, "Hey, we want to get Iran back to the table. We want to get Iran back to the table." And then if you kill the negotiators, and then it comes out, and the stance becomes, "Oh, well, no, we were just supporting Israel, making it appear that everything was going ahead so that Israel could carry out this strike."
Right.
And then they kind of want to have the Khomeini negotiate, but the Khomeini's bunker gets smacked. Now there's direct threats on the Khomeini now. And so you can't really trust America as a mediating partner if the fallback narrative to explain the events is that the negotiations were set up to decapitate Iranian power. And if negotiating with Israel means the negotiators, you get targeted because they don't want to negotiate, who's going to come to the table? You just can't trust America as a partner functionally in that regard, which is unfortunate. And now we see Russia being positioned as the mediator between Israel and Iran, which is not, I don't know if that's a good or a bad idea.
Right.
Russia, while bombing Ukraine, but Russia there's a lot of Russian Jewish people in Israel. Russia does have relations with Iran, but it feels somewhat hypocritical to have, Putin being the one mediating a conflict resolution when he's devastating, Ukraine. Doesn't really gel. But yeah, so I mean, so many things that happen. Like, what does Iran look like in free fall? Nobody's thought about it. What happens to areas like Baluchistan, which has nuclear storage of nuclear weapons? What happens with Islamic extremism? What happens with Iraq?
Yeah.
So none of this has been thought about, as it never is. Everything's just reactive, hour to hour. And I know, like you've seen it firsthand too, that these situations become very, very complex. I mean, we had Libya; it's still broken. Afghanistan in the hands of Taliban.
Right. Yeah.
Iraq, the Shia government controlling it, which was basically Iran. Syria in the hands of Jelani, who may or may not be a positive force because of his Al-Qaeda associations. Has he truly become an international statesman, or is he? We don't know.
Or both.
Or both, exactly. So we don't have a track record, really.
Right.
Probably you could argue since Bosnia of things melding back together, and Iran is a very complicated country. And so Khomeini goes down, Rashid goes down. What happens?
Right.
Does the IRGC split into terrorist-like cells and launch smaller operations, but of devastating impact? What happens to the enriched uranium? Can we get in there and secure that fast enough before they hand it over to Al-Qaeda? Lest we forget that Iran sheltered Al-Qaeda. This scenario can blow out in about a dozen different directions. And then there's the other side of things, like, okay, well, say, Israel has a limited number of interceptor missiles. They take a long time to make those. They're very effective. Amazing job of defending Israel. What happens when they run out? On the bigger Iranian missile volleys, there's $1 billion a night to defend Tel Aviv. So how long can we do that for? And they're doing like smaller missile strikes, 30 or less. Okay, are they waiting back for a bigger wave to stress the air defense, to find vulnerabilities? They've hit more precision targets of late. So there are 200,000 U.S. Israeli dual nationals in Israel. There are a total of estimated 600 to 7,000, including the dual nationals, Americans in Israel. So if this goes sideways, how do we deal? Afghanistan evac was 127,000. This is 5 times larger. That's not being thought about. In fact, Huckabee, according to the media, had a fight with Netanyahu when the Americans started trying to plan evac. Because Netanyahu doesn't want to see people exiting Israel.
Yeah.
But if this goes sideways, how do we deal with, and that's just the Americans, another 50,000 Brits. What about the French?
Yeah, right.
So we've been talking 1 million people, maybe more. How do we deal with that?
Yeah.
You've got Cyprus, okay, but now where are you going to put all those people in hotel rooms for how long? Okay, how much air traffic can you get out of there? How many can you boat across at a time? How many can you fly across? Is the airspace open? Is the airspace safe? Can you move some to Egypt? How many of them? Is it safe for these people in Egypt being Israeli, given the anti-Israeli sentiment in Egypt that could be there? This is very complicated, and none of that plan is there. None.
Yeah.
None of that.
But and the second there's a couple things you said, but the second you bring in Cyprus, because we just don't know this here in the States, so it's not a thing that we ever concern ourselves with. But they come on the map now, and they have interests. And so it's like, while the world is looking at this and leaning on us, our faction is going to assassinate the leader of whatever it's going to be, right? Because they've been waiting for this moment because they foresee this, right? Not that they're omnipotent or prescient, but they go, hey, look, if these guys get involved, we're an obvious location to come. While during this distraction, this is our chance to do the thing that moves us forward. Because for folks who don't know, Cyprus is not the calmest place in the world. Not dangerous day to day, but there's definitely folks who don't get along there. The other thing, and look, I am. I'll just guess that I'm a little bit more pro. Yeah, I'm a little bit more pro-Israel probably than you, I think, right? But I'm also reasonable and rational. And so when I see the Prime Minister of Israel talk about an existential threat, I go, "Oh, that's an info op," because over here in the United States, we're about 22-0 against all of the existential threats that have been thrown at us, right? So he's using our language to convince us of something, which tells me that they're selling me something. And I don't like to get sold shit, And so the second he said those words, I'm like, info op, and maybe it's not an info op. Maybe they do consider it existential,
It is. So you have to distinguish Israel from the Prime Minister. So for a very long time, and we saw this with the hostage ceasefire at work as well. So there's an element called the Hasbro, which is basically translates as propaganda, and they promote Israeli interests, but that became promoting Netanyahu's interest, and so it became narratively difficult to distinguish Israel from Netanyahu. And there are two different things. His popularity polls are shocking. At one point, 70% of the Israelis wanted him out of power. But his strike on Iran has probably increased his popularity and whatever else. But he has 3 criminal corruption cases against him, and he can't be tried for those while there's a war on, constitutionally speaking. So he needs a perpetual war. So if he was going to be forced out of Gaza, we knew that he would bomb Iran if he got pushed out of there. There's no war, then he has to face those charges. So it's a very complicated political situation. So I wouldn't say I'm concerned about the personal interests taking precedences over the safety of the state of Israel. And that's a very, very different thing. Pause for a second. Just going to mute 1 second.
Yeah. All right. So while he pauses, everybody go to the Break It Down Show, breakitdownshow.com. You can hit the PayPal link and you can do a little subscription there. That money goes directly to me. I don't need Patreon. I don't need anybody else. That's just a great way to fund the show. All right. Done with my commercial. Come on back. No, I love it. You gave me a chance to talk about my show for a second.
That's always good. It's a very complex geopolitical understanding. You have to understand Israel. So I spent, spent a lot of time communicating with Israelis, obviously Israeli hostage families, but understanding Israeli society, and our own family are Holocaust survivors ultimately. So there's a distinction between being, between being pro-Israel as Israel's right to exist, absolutely. It's a bit like saying, it's like the term pro-Palestinians become confused to meaning pro-Hamas. You can be against Hamas and for Palestinian right to exist and dignity and determination and peace between Palestine and Israel. But, the hijacking of that terminology is designed to polarize people further. And so, the concerns that I have in looking at the geopolitical impact of this, or even if you look at the impact of anti-Semitism has never been worse, and it's been inflated by this horrible conflict, and I would have said was one of Hamas's objectives, was to achieve that.
Right.
It's made the world much less safe for Jewish people. So it's a very complicated, nuanced situation where everybody's looking to kind of throw mud at someone and attack someone. But if you just take a humanistic perspective, as I think we should always lead with, then it's a little bit different. And there's also been the question, if you are vested in the survival of Israel, there's always a risk that Israel could lose. So is this the best thing? Iran's nuclear capability is a relative certainty, despite what Tulsi Gabbard and others may have said, that they have been rapidly enriching. And Israel said the same thing that we assessed, was that the main barrier is not the fissile material at this point, it's assembly. And so it's a little different from Saddam's WMDs in that respect, that there is a genuine threat. If you want to, Iran saying, we went building nukes. Well, why did you build a base that was secret 90 meters under the ground? Where you were uranium you didn't tell anybody about? That sounds like it's civilian. Of course it's not. So it's very complicated. But the only people that are trying to decelerate, I'd say, is the Europeans. No one else is. Trump's accelerating. No one else is accelerating. Europeans are trying to find a way to decelerate. No one else is.
Let me slow down and back up for a second here. I put a link to Michael Oren's latest thing. And look, again, because we're here in America, we kind of focus on 5 minutes in front of us, maybe 5 minutes behind us. We lose track of these things. But Golda Meir is a very important person in Israeli history. Her speeches are powerful. And Michael Oren obviously has ties to Israel himself, being an ambassador from there to us, that kind of thing. And so a very specific, and I would say not positive Netanyahu conversationalist, right? But here he is talking about how Netanyahu's got his golden moment. The other day I had, and I know you and John Spencer don't see eye to eye on how these things go, but you also have different jobs and different lenses to look through. So John Spencer comes on and he says what he says in terms of there is no genocide going on, because according to the rules of war, how he sees him, and that's his job. He's like, no, it's not there. And that's not all he says, but he talks about modern war in general, and all these different things that are happening. But there's not agreement, right, between you, him, and Oren. Now I'm going to bring in Aaron Good, who I had on the show the other day, and he went so far as to say, because we were talking about anti-Semitism, he's like, it looks like anti-Semitism is the right approach, and because he's upset. Well, look, and I'm paraphrasing an hour into very small, so let's be fair to Aaron. But Aaron's a PhD. He studies these things, and he's very critical of the United States and our willingness to bend the rules for our benefit, but not to follow the rules that we have set up. And so that he's compromising, and he's a dissenter by PhD. He's a dissenter, right? All of these things go into this mix. So even as we're talking about this, and when the president's getting his advice, and when Gabbard's trying to, there's just this mix of stuff. How does anyone get any fucking thing done in a world that is so? It's just like with the Russians. Like if you are an American and you wrote a PhD paper on why we need to fight Russia, your whole career is focused on getting into a fight with Russia, whether you want it to happen or not. That's what you want to. We have all these competing interests. So how do we get anything done here right now? I mean, the war is as dangerous and as hot as it's been, but we're hopeful that we're going to get out of it. But are we?
I mean, that's the question. How does this thing, if the regime collapses, how does it collapse? What happens? Does that break into smaller units of violence? But to go through a lot of that, yes, international law has become a tool for coercion by the West. We don't follow the rules that we prescribe on others. To Gaza, now, but keep in mind, I've written for the United Nations Security Council on humanitarian issues. My briefs have been used in meetings with Netanyahu. I don't know if it meets a benchmark of genocide, because that's very difficult, but it probably does meet crime against humanity. And
these are, just for everybody watching, these are actual legal terms. So see you guys now.
Yeah, so there's legal genocides are very difficult to reach, and I don't throw that word around lightly.
Right.
But so Israel controls the ports of entry to Gaza. When you control the ports of entry as the occupying force, you have a legal responsibility to provide food, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There will be a lot of questions around the collateral damage that they incur for targeting, say, a high-value target inside a refugee camp where they kill 40, 50 people to get one person. As I noted before, one of my friends lost 31 family members in a day, and they had nothing to do with Hamas. Absolutely nothing. His whole family wiped out in one day. And he's a peace activist. So, if Putin was doing these things, we'd be up in arms. But it's an ally doing it. And one of the things I warned repeatedly was that the cost of this war will be rules-based order. And I warned that to Congress. I warned that to many people. And there may be an idea of expedience in the Trump administration that rules don't apply to us because of American exceptionalism, as the decay of rules-based order is great. But what that does is make the world instantly multipolar. And, we had the Taliban screaming about international law and the Israeli attacks on Iran. It's like those guys break 20-something out of 30 United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They break most of those. And then, you can't, seeing Iran and seeing another chronic violator of international law, seeing them try to run back to international law, or even Israel trying to call Iran's response to Israel's war was an act of aggression, which is, the striking of Iran. Preemptive war is illegal. And then they're trying to say that the Iranian strikes in retaliation are illegal. So none of that international law becomes meaningless. And that's not good.
Yeah.
That's not good for maintaining a fragile world. That's even less good in a multipolar world where there is no single hegemon. Because the US is not the hegemon. If it was, none of this would have happened. The war with Ukraine would be over. Gaza would be over. The Iranians would be doing civilian enrichment. And, we wouldn't be scoring off at China from time to time. There's no coercion from the US. It's not able to coerce any other country except its allied partners on trade deals for tariffs. That's the only people that the US coercion is harming, is its allies at this point.
Yeah. And I'm going to be fair to Aaron Good here. He says the same thing, right? So when I say this bombastic thing, he's also playing in the world of rational people. And you're right. The ability of the U.S. to say stop, and they stop. It's we're hegemon ish. We're not hegemon us. Like we're not full of hegemony. We're a sort of a hegemon, probably the hegemon if there is one, but not universal. We don't have universal hegemony, I guess is probably the best way to say it.
I don't even think it's. I don't really even think it is. Trump wanted to be isolationist, bring back manufacturing. His current mindset is based in the 1930s and 1940s of American manufacturing strength and isolationism. And in doing so, you withdraw your role as the hegemon, and you can't step in and out of that role. He jumps in with a boss. Oh, it's your problem. Well, you can't have it both ways. So I think probably between John Spencer and Aaron, is it?
Aaron Good, yeah.
Probably sits.
And I think highly of these guys. Everybody, we're not critiquing; we're illustrating a landscape. Go ahead.
Yeah, I probably sit between, their perspectives, somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, which is fine. I don't expect to agree with everybody all the time, but kind of what I have to do is write reports, write briefs to help make the best decisions that are possible. But my concern is always minimizing loss of human life, respecting international law, respecting a rules-based order, so that we do have an element of predictability in the world. And that's what the law does. Without the law, the world becomes unpredictable. Without rules-based order, it's unpredictable, and that's dangerous.
Yeah, and what do you go back to when you want to go back to something? If you've rooted up the tree of sanity, it's like, well, there's no foundation anymore. Like we've compromised these things, like the Taliban going back to international law, right? Like, no, you didn't believe in that thing 10 days ago. Another thing that strikes me as important, and I want to get to Brad's question here in a second. Where did Brad's question go? There's right there. And this kind of goes to that. I think about running source operations, right? And if I'm in Israel and I'm working for my team and I've got guys who are going to help me understand the nuclear system, that's a significant thing. And I want to be like, can we please operate quickly here? This is a perishable operation. My person's exposed. And I'm glad to have that person die for my country, even though they're Iranian, but that's kind of the game there. But it's hard to forestall these things in certain instances, and as the pressure ramps up, you're trying to keep a source engaged with you, and it becomes more and more dangerous. Well, the reality is a source and its proximity to the thing you want to know about is dangerous in this case. And so it's entirely possible that Israel has just whacked a source or two because they hit these things. Because when you get that phone call, they're here. That's because they're in there too, right? And of course, you would never reveal this on the open stage. Like, yeah, we killed our only source on, and now we have to develop a new one. Everybody, and like you talked about shock and awe, how it's like it explodes and all this, and then it slows down. That's because everybody looks around like, who the fuck compromised me? And so everybody gets suspicious. It gets dangerous internally, and it's really hard to act. I wanted to bring that in because when we talk about the intel side of this and the miracle of these things, there's costs to dragging this out. There's costs to the proximity to knowledge. Any thoughts on that at all?
I mean, I think that's really astute what you said. The likelihood that people who had strong placement and access were likely killed in some of these strikes, because to give the positioning and the probability of it being a pure kind of intercept tech-in driven thing is highly unlikely. So I think, and then once you lose that placement, and then, that's, I guess, where you go back to is, if we look at the decision tree that, is a tree of options, software option, hardware option. So the Khomeini is now probably feeling directly pressured. Who's he going to turn to? Is he going to turn to the old guard IRGC that wants to smack and destroy and eliminate Israel? Quite probably. Because he feels under threat and fear and paranoia, so he needs his most aggressive tool set, and so that may push us on that branch of the tree. But yeah, I mean, when you, as kind of you pointed out, in your source development and everything that goes into that, once that network is used, it's spent quite often. and they've spent it on this very, very high level dramatic attack. Yeah, it's a really, really astute take, and that may change what we know. I don't think Trump was briefed on what Netanyahu was going to do. I think it was done, and then because it was a success, he said, "Yeah, we were briefed all along." Because the Israelis are very, and probably what makes our operation so successful is they're very closed with what they're going to do. Very good OPSEC, very good InfoSec, and then so to kind of address to Brad's question, I don't think the US planned this.
Yeah,
I don't think they knew it was coming.
Yeah, I agree with you. They may have some cross knowledge, but at some place you have to go dark, like not just black, but like singularity with who knows about this stuff, because it's tough. Just like we're never going to know who blew up Nord Stream. We're never going to know who blew up the dam in Ukraine. And by the way, anytime these complicated things happen, it is a good question to say, did the Americans do this? Because quite often the answer is going to be yes. Because I'll tell you right now, to blow that dam up in Ukraine, that's special operations. To move that much explosive surreptitiously, but nobody knows, to get it into place, to do it properly. This is not like a wad of TNT. It's like demolition. It's a big deal. Yeah. So the logistics of doing intel, you create opportunities, you give the command information, and then if you do these cataclysmic things, whoever that source is, the first Mossad agent is not in that area anymore. They have, for now, they're burned up, right? Even and they have to have a reliable. It's like when you do a drug bust, and if the same guy's at the drug bust when the drug bust happens all the time, people start looking around like, "Hey, Scott's here. Wait a second, this is going to be a bust, right?" And so that's a real thing. We have to manage your exposure and your source's exposure until you terminate the source, and that can and probably in this case equals this person's probably going to die. But that's combat.
That is, and it's and they'll probably die very horribly. Given
because they have information, right? And if they're not a source and they're pegged as a source, guess what? They die very horribly and they don't know anything, and it's horrible. But that is the reality of these things.
No, and it's vividly difficult to tell where this goes. It's vividly. Everybody sort of comes out and says, "Oh, Iran's just a paper tiger that just happens so quickly." I just remember those first few days of Gulf War II, shock and awe. President Bush on that carrier declaring victory after 3 weeks, and and then there's the predatory opportunists like the other jihadists and things like that. It's just, it's. I don't know how good, it's a fair thing to say, and I've been asked this, is, okay, well, if you have a degree of certainty, and we had a degree of certainty last year after, during the Isfahan events, that Iran was certainly is nuclear capable, but and the challenge was assembly. And you'll see Israel use the same language that we used a year ago in the last week, exact same phraseology. And so the question becomes, well, okay, if Iran is pursuing its nuclear capability and for weapons and whatever else, and there would be risks that they could hand a nuclear device to Al Qaeda or whomever. That's possible. How do you get them back off that nuclear ledge? They don't have breakout, as countries like North Korea did and become a nuclear power with breakout.
Yeah,
I don't have a good answer to that.
Who does?
Yeah. I mean, maybe it just should have been a bunker buster dropped on Fordo, right? Just that. Boom. One heavy freaking bomb. We said no. Because the Iranians wouldn't have anything that could hit the stealth bomber. They could drop that thing. And that would have just been it.
Is this one of the challenges because it seems like as we've gotten more precise, it becomes tougher and tougher to win. I mean, the imposition of, and this is just me freestyling, so tell me if I'm wrong, if you think I'm wrong, but at some point the Taliban is not precise. and they beat us. They dominated. They imposed their will. They caused
Mm-hmm.
and I always talk about affect over effect.
Mm-hmm.
The villagers respected the Americans, but they feared the Taliban. And it's
Yep.
one dude coming to town. It's two dudes. And they're like, yeah, but we'll kidnap you and cut your thumb off. Just the tip so you can have some of your thumb, but don't cross us. We would never do that. We would never,
No.
we would kill the wedding, but we would
Yeah.
never do that town to town intimidation.
No, and I mean that's something that. See, this is I guess where when we talk about modern warfare, and is that our enemies, part of our problem with the enemies that we have, is that we lack imagination and we lack willingness to certain kinds of violence because we have international law, and that the willingness not to use certain kinds of violence is actually a good thing. But our enemies don't have that same restriction. So yes, we have limits on how we can conduct war that our enemies do not. The West wouldn't be able to do operations like Israel can do. And yeah, Israel has a very different threat profile because Iran has wanted to destroy it, because Hamas has wanted to destroy it. And because they're a very small country, 10 million people, surrounded by relatively hostile countries that are much, much larger, they have to punch above their weight. They have to have high impact, high speed operations and degradation capabilities. Absolutely. We don't have the stresses to dream up those kinds of activities except in special operations. And if they were dreamt up in special operations, our policymakers would never allow them. We're not allowed to have imagination. But that doesn't mean we should fight like our enemy, which is, I guess, we should accord to international law. We should accord to these things, because if we did go for full capability, full atrocity, and just throw it all out and use civilian suffering as a weapon, our destructive capability, that's why after World War II we created the UN, despite whatever it evolved into. Why we created these principles of universal human rights, because we saw how freaking horrible we can be to each other. And if we don't want to get the West comfortable with suffering of civilians and the weaponization of suffering, we don't want to go there. That's a bad place. So we have to conduct ourselves. But it's just complicated when you have an ally such as Israel that is the one that's shaking RBO to equal proportions of Putin shakes it. Because then it's into what you and I like to talk about, secondary and tertiary effects. Okay, well, how do we coerce another country that gets uppity? We can't. How do we deal with something? We can't. How do we find stability in the global order? Can we, without another horrible world war to get us to our senses again? I don't know. It's very complicated, and it's the people that I work with, and really on a lot of the evac side and emergency side and crisis side, and we haven't slept since this thing really started.
That's so crazy. Yeah. And folks don't realize, like, you in your way are on the front lines of these things, and this goes back the whole time. I mean, aid into Gaza has been a thing you worked on. Kidnapped family members, you're working on these things, and it is exhausting. It's thank you. It's thankless. It's not all that well earning, because you have to be a principled person. I know we've talked about this on Monday, but you can't just listen, everybody. If you're like, well, I'll do that for $100,000, you become part of the problem, right? And so someone like Scott has to say, I'm not doing this for money. I'm doing this because this is the right thing, and has to be above reproach. Now, look, could you go out and make a whole bunch of money doing it? Sure, and still do a good job. Sure, but Scott and I both know that at the ground level, it's very hard to weld these things together and remain believable, because when you walk into that room with that person who's contrary to you and you've got a silk suit on, it's a barrier that's very hard to get around and to overcome. So thanks for doing that work, man. I know it's exhausting.
Well, you're absolutely correct, because if you take money and contracts on this humanitarian side of the work, or even on policy briefing, because I brief all around the world, I don't get paid for that. For a very simple reason. If I got paid for that, then I would probably be categorized as a foreign asset and whatever else. And then the objectiveness of what was being briefed would come under question, and it would be right to come under question. So by not being paid, you achieve several things. You remain above reproach. The work is objective as it can be because it's not dictated by policy or position. It's assessments that you can say that nobody is really that would be just that can be uncomfortable at times, but necessary to have them in consideration. We have to do the what ifs. You have to if you can't be fired, then all of those things. And if you take the money, then you're going to get the public is going to say, well, you're just making money off of suffering. Well, the people that you help are going to look at you and say, well, you're making money off of that suffering. And then you're going to say, well, you're a proxy for the left, the right, the this, the that. And then you're screwed. So most of my work has been enabled by being able to be trusted by the communities universally and to be trusted within power, as for a general term, but politically trusted in the West at the same time. And I have to protect that space.
Yeah.
And the only way to protect that is with integrity. Because I don't want to be spending half my day getting tweets at me. I've been accused of being this and that. None of it's the case.
Right.
But you don't want to spend your day defending yourself to have to hire a PR agent because you went to a dinner with.
Yeah. It's so true. And there's a term called Berlinery, right? And it's because Berlin was so filled with agents and double agents. And John Spencer and I talked about this, where it's hard to even work in these environments because even if let me say this in a different way. If you deploy and you're a woman and with the American military, and if you walk next to a dude, you are having sex with that dude. Whether that's true or not is irrelevant. And so that tarnishes your reputation, and you don't even realize it until you see that game that's going on. And it's all this mess. So it's the same kind of thing here. So just your presence in DC or in Berlin or in Israel, walking around, like, who is that person an agent for? That person's an asset. You hear us all the time. Donald Trump's a Russian asset. No, he's not. Tulsi Gabbard's a Russian asset. No, she's not. Come on, stop. But they do this game to each other, and some of them are agents. That's the best part. And there's not such a thing as like a quadruple agent, but there is, because if that person is trading influence, they're being an agent in a different way, and so if you can reliably say, someone's always going to accuse, it's like being on X when someone's like, you don't know anything about this. You're like, oh, okay, well, look at my history, my record, and then come back to me and say that. You're welcome to think that, but can you prove it? No, you can't, because this is where I set my morality. This is where I set my professionalism. And do I make mistakes? Sure. Right. So you work in a world where you can't ask for a lot. You can take something maybe from someone, but it's not a world where you're going to become a millionaire. So again, thanks.
Certainly not doing this work if you pay your bills through other mechanisms and other means. And I always take the approach. With everything these days, anyone can take a screenshot of a signal chat or whatever, and you have to assume that at some point that could happen. And so you have to be mindful at all times, and that everything that's done has to have integrity. So you're not backtracking or trying to defend something that's indefensible. And that's important. If you can't say, and that's why I like being in this sort of political analytical space and the law and kind of rule of law enforcement space, because it doesn't get into the murk of espionage style intelligence. Just won't do it. It's too dangerous. And it will just, it's best to be able to stand by your work, stand by it. I keep things rule of law, because that's the safest place, because everything becomes about evidence-based decision-making. Everything comes about that. And terrorism is a crime, and these things are crimes. Money laundering is a crime. And then it's just analysis, and that analysis often comes from speaking to the stakeholders. But I always do it in a very open way, like when I had to speak to the Shia and the Sunni. This is why I'm calling you. This is what it is. This is so we can understand how you see these things and how you see the stability risks to your country. This is not a secret, right? This is not, and that's just a better way of going about it, and flying above the radar at all times is how I live life in that regard.
Yeah.
And
I took a similar approach when I was in the field, and yeah, like I don't have anything, but I do communicate for you. I can help you maybe get things. I can introduce you to people, but that's it. Like I don't need anything from you, and I don't offer you anything back other than the ability to communicate more clearly with someone who you're not communicating clearly with. And that, for the most part, allowed me to build reliable, provable trust, high risk trust as well. And they would say, Pete, I will protect you, because this is sheikhs, this is colonels, whoever it is in between, because I was doing my job to inform one side and the other side, kind of a double agent of sorts, but I was never against my country, right? And so I was reliable, so reliable that like the Iraqi, one of my KPIs was when the Iraqi general would say, get Pete my advisor. And if he thought I was his advisor, which I was, but he had to say it, I would never say it. Once he said that, I'm like, okay, good. I've got a good relationship with this guy. And that whole thing is part of the process that you feel. It's like, hey, get us Scott, because he's going to talk to us clearly. And by the way, this also makes you bad news Richards, because I know I was bad news Turner. And I'm like, that ain't going to work.
Go
ahead.
I have no hesitation giving the bad news or difficult news, or talking about things that other people don't want. Again, I don't have a position to defend other than preservation of human life and human dignity. People often say, I don't know where the next Einstein could come from. I think probably said it for a new show. That it could be, a little girl from, Nangarhar. It could be a kid in Mali. We don't know. We should preserve life. And the natural instinct of people is not towards violence. That's the compulsion of power. And the more violence we can decelerate, then the better access we can get to minerals and strategic minerals and trade and these things. But it's just better, because then everybody, you become a constant in the sense that your values are easily understood by all the players. Your reasons for being there are understood by all the players. And then then you're also understood to try to be an effector of positive change, and not manipulation, not dissembling or deception or whatever else. That your presence is somewhat serious on the board, and that at least I've been blessed enough that my recommendations do make it into important places. And sometimes we're lucky, and you can't compel power. You can't. DC is going to do what DC is going to do. The UN's going to do what the UN's going to do. The EU's going to do. But you can say, well, okay, well, you just read this, ignore it, read it, factor it. It's up to you. And that's a good place to operate from, because it's a space. So I'm very happy for that, but I'd certainly like to see the world be a little bit more stable. I'd like to have a world with, I think, with climate change, with AI, with all these things, multipolarism. Do we really need to be lobbing freaking missiles at each other? We got enough problems. We got more than enough to deal with. To save the species, we don't need to we've already, we got enough problems. Can we not?
We do. And let's work on happier, better problems. If we can we get to those? Maybe no. Okay. These problems are very hard to solve. And the path is always a critical path. And we tend to want to jump steps, and it's like, nope, sorry, you have to hit this step. You have to hit this mark. And this is where, when you said earlier, second, third order effects, that for me normally is a word where I go, oh, that person said that because those are the words you say now, but they don't have or display a mastery of these things. I know you do, so I don't think that about you. But you understand that, like, when you send people to Cyprus, there is going to be an impact. That impact might look like political upheaval. It might look like profiteering. It might look like, all these other things, because you and I have had these conversations. I know that. But the reality is there's always these other effects that knock on and create opportunity for something else. It doesn't mean you don't make a step, but you do. Here's what I do. I'm looking at the room. I'm trying to understand who people are, what they're going for, what their motivation is, right? And you'll hear these things come out. Existential crisis, like, okay, that person down on the seriousness level. They can go back up, but that's a mark against you if they are looking at influence vertically in their world. That for me is like that person's destabilizing this area. So I'll give a quick story and I'll shut up and let you talk. But I was in a province in Iraq. I was new to that place. Didn't belong to that place, but I was visiting because there was a higher element, and I got invited to go to a meeting that I had really no business being part of. But they wanted to see what I thought. This probably sound familiar to you.
Yeah.
And they were going to give the general a go no go decision about something that they wanted to do. And one of the things they talked about was this tower, this freedom tower. We will give you, and we will protect our legacy and hearts and minds. And so I got to raise my hand, and because I've been killed by the staff, which we talked about in the last episode, I go, is this a meeting where we get to ask hard questions? Like, can we be honest? And then, because they always say, oh, yes, of course. And I'm like, okay, has anyone asked the Iraqi governor? And meanwhile, like the political advisor has said, we'll tell the governor to do this. We'll tell the governor. We talked about this last episode too. We'll tell the governor to do this. We'll tell the governor to do that. We'll do the. Oh, but the ambassador's coming. Oh, and when the ambassador comes, oh, the ambassador. And so there was this adoration and just posturing about the ambassador, but thumb on the governor, right? And so I already know the second or third order effects are going to be bad because they're making a decision that has nothing to do with respect for the fact that this guy's the fucking governor. And when we leave, he's going to have to try to govern this place. And you're going to give him a fucking tower? With the time you have left, you're going to give him a tower. And you think that's going to... And so I asked this question, has anyone asked the governor? Because I know governors, and they don't want that shit. No. And they're very clear, like, here's the thing I need. I need a generator. So I can turn the lights on. All right, I'm shutting up now.
No, you're exactly correct. And that's where we get into the theater of position and power. And I'm fortunate to know a lot of ambassadors. Many of them are good friends. But I watch the theater when they come to visit. It becomes a show. Yeah. And that is part of the show of power and process and whatever else. But it's a bit like, we're in host nation, and your approach to things is very, similar to mine, is that if we want to have stability, which is the key in nation building, you can't build without stability. You've got to understand host nation requirements, and you've got to understand what their concerns are, just like you were concerned about. Well, has the governor been consulted in this plan? And they usually aren't.
No.
Because an idea is hatched and the whiteboard fairy comes out and we end up with ridiculousness.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. It's, I don't know. It's difficult because sort of looking at this, what instability and what new chaos are we creating? Right. How are we changing the dimensions of power? And there's a lot of hawkish, positions on things. Oh, it's going to be, great. Everything's going to work. And, just knowing it's a bit like, a political platform and all the promises that are made when somebody's running for prime minister or president. And it's like, there's none of that's going to be reality. So what's reality actually going to look like? Because that's the shit that you and I have to deal with. So that kind of buoyant optimism. I mean, yes, the world without Iran and without proxies, that's a big changer. Okay, but given a lot of these cells had degrees of autonomy, what does that look like when you got, say, Al-Qaeda in Sao Paulo? There is. And you've got them lined up with the cartels. They are. And you've got Hezbollah all through the tri-state area. Right. What happens when they go solo? Right? No. And what happens, right, when we've already seen a cartel adopt guerrilla warfare tactics, Hezbollah tactics, like the beheadings of bloggers and Hezbollah strategies. Yeah. So what happens when these guys really get together because they don't have a master anymore? What's that look like? There's a lot of things that happen when you take that element out, and 100% a world without Iran and its meddling and Iran's involvement in the narco trade. 85 to 90% of Afghanistan's heroin always went through Iran. That's a big. Right. What happens to that? Does it get worse? Does it get better? And Iran and Afghanistan and meth. What happens there? What happens to all this shit?
Yeah.
It doesn't magically get better.
No,
That's
no,
for
no.
sure. And it's
Yeah.
patient, diligent work, and they're not good at that in the West.
Yeah. Absolutely patient, diligent work, and it's fraught with errors. It is uncomfortable work. And so when you talk about a new Iran, what does that look like, right? And so as much as the hawks love to find the next enemy, the doves, they're like, oh, it'll be okay. These farmers will have such big crops. They'll hire migrant people to come pick their crops for them, and we'll have a co-op. And then you're just like, no, that's not going to happen either. You are going to get women raped. You will do that. Can you accept that? If you can accept that, then we can start talking about that. But if you think that they're not going to get raped, then we're not being serious here, because there is
going to spring workout. Not great.
Not great. Not great. Yeah. So I want to get us back to the conflict and then wrap this thing up. So right now we have Israel lacking capability for nuclear proliferation. And the one thing I do know is if Iran gets a nuke, everybody in the neighborhood is going to want a nuke too, whether it's Iran sharing or they're like trying to stymie that. So it's a really dangerous time. One of the narratives here in America is they've done us a favor, and that's pushed, guess what, by Israel. So have they done us a favor? I don't know. And do we know enough to even know enough yet?
Yeah, no, I would say we don't know. I'd say maybe.
Yeah,
maybe this all turns out, and maybe my concerns or the vectors that I see where this can go off the rail don't eventuate, and I'm very happy if that does not happen. Maybe they have made the world a safer place. We assessed that they were nuclear capable last year, and it was assembly. At that point, we assessed about 3 weapons. Israel also came out and said 3 to 5 around the same, a couple months after us. Then they're up to 9 for fissile material. And they kept saying that last year they were a couple of weeks away. So after we hit Isfahan and all that stuff happened, why the fuck wouldn't Iran accelerate their nuclear program, knowing that this was going to come? Right. I think they're just going to sit on their hands, and they've got Fordo 90 meters beneath the ground to try to hide from Israeli bombs. That's not civilian. So why are we shooting? Because they would want to probably get to having a nuclear arsenal of, say, 20 devices, and then they can be breakout. Ha! Look at our glorious missiles. I mean, there are loads of suitcase nukes and shit missing from the Soviet Empire, right? We don't talk about that. We know those damn things got sold off to countries like Kazakhstan. It's in the fucking LA Times in the 90s. We know. We don't know where they went. Yeah. So why are we assuming? And they're like, well, if they had a nuke, they would say, and then nobody would bomb them. It's like, no, you want to get to breakout, which means you need a certain amount, and you need to have, you could stick it on a Scud, but you probably don't want your Scud shut down by by an interceptor. You probably want it on a hypersonic, right? So it's been, Israel used the same phrase we did assembly. So to kind of wrap this up, I mean, my watch points are Strait of Hormuz. My second watch point would be U.S. bases in the region, whether that comes from militias or smaller units or anything else that Iran can say, oh, it's not us. It's just, the world getting angry at America. And then obviously if there's any truth or substance to their intent to strike Gulf-based oil production if the U.S. strikes. So those are the 3 things to watch. They were having a vote involvement, I believe, yesterday on the Strait of Hormuz. There's chatter on it today. There's chatter on all these things. And that tells us if we are accelerating or at least coming to some kind of manageable conflict, or if Iran tries to survive and devolve this into war of attrition. America cannot land boots on the ground, and airstrikes are expensive. We do them for a few months, like we did to the Houthi, and then we stop. And so
it's true.
And then
you don't win elections when you put troops on the ground too, and soon enough we'll have one here.
Could you imagine? The narrative is America going to go and fight another war in the Middle East, an Israeli prompted war. American boots on the ground. We're back doing this again. Did we not learn from the other sort of 3? If you count Afghanistan, South Asia, but if you count wars of intervention, they haven't gone well. We're doing it. It's not electorally good. And the American economy expanding the debt ceiling by $4 trillion. We're going to whack another 2 on that for war. Take it to 6. And if it devolves, does China take advantage of the sea we've moved out of the region?
Yes.
Because now
every time.
an easy grab. We can't deal with that. How does this affect getting Ukraine stable? How does this? It's a lot to think about. But those are the 3 points that I'm watching: Strait of Hormuz, U.S. bases, and also because Al Qaeda threatened those two last year. Saif al-Adel made an announcement that if the U.S. did certain things, they would erase the bases. Identical language, actually, to Khomeini's language, or the Khomeini's language. And then if there is any activity or visible threat towards Gulf oil production, that's
just real quick, then we'll wrap everything up here. One of the rules that everybody should keep in mind is everything's a competition. Everything. Yep. And so there's always someone saying, that's my advantage, that's my opportunity, I'm going to take my chance. They may not win that opportunity, but it's always moving. When we get regime change in Iran, that is just the next competition starting out. We had a Shah at one point, and that dude got taken out. So this power isn't easily settled. And instability is the norm. You guys remember these rules, and you'll have an understanding of what's going on. What is your sense in terms of the quality of news? Maybe Great Britain, I don't know. Here in America, I hear so much info operation, so much spin, so much talking points that I just don't watch it because I just don't want to be lied to all the time.
I don't watch it at all. I watch some of the stuff from some commentators on Twitter, and I listen to people on the ground in certain places and try to understand what it is that we're looking at. But I don't watch the news. It's just garbage because we created a talking head culture, and it's about having a position, and that position is about a policy or a desired outcome and not about delivery of information. I think we have an information sickness in social media too, which is about clicks and just bullshit. People claiming stuff, about this is happening, that's happening, or source Reuters, and there's no fucking source. It's just so you got to clean out all that as people try to disorient or push their position or what their desired outcome is, and they try to create a narrative of their desired outcome as being fact, to make it seem like the desired outcome is the natural conclusion. It's like, well, it may not be, and it's not. Big commentators don't agree with me on things, but it's like, I don't do the same job as you. As like I said, it's scenario modeling, and I'm tracking where this goes. I'm tracking indicators on the chain of events to understand what it is we may have, and then if we have those outcomes, what it looks like for mitigation to reduce impact on trade, global stability, loss of life, So it's I do a different thing that I don't think a lot of people understand what it is I actually do. That's fine. I don't really mind.
Well, it's hard to understand. You and I have talked, I don't know, a couple dozen times, and even still, I'm learning things about you, and likewise, I'm sure. So,
absolutely.
I don't want to take any more of your time. Yeah, go ahead.
I appreciate it. I got to get back on looking at the emergency situation if this all goes sideways, and how we deal with 1 million people in Israel. We need to get to safety is kind of what I got to get back into, and try to get people to understand that it may be great, even if it's not. Even if it is great, we still need a plan just in case.
Still need a plan.
Goes badly.
Follow Scott on X. That's a good spot to get his information. I wish you could write more, but you have to actually do real work. So keep doing that and hopefully save us from ourselves. Everybody else, I'll be back on in about 45 minutes talking about some history, military stuff. You guys will love it. Scott, I'll talk to you in a second. Everybody else, see you in a little bit.
Bye-bye.